Welcome to this deep dive. It looks like you're ready to boost those reading skills, maybe for something like the IELTS, with some sources on skimming and scanning.
Yeah, those are really valuable skills.
Absolutely. And we're going to break down exactly how to use those techniques, and you'll be a more efficient reader by the end. Not just for tests, but for anything you need to read.
For sure.
I remember, before I learned these techniques, I felt so overwhelmed. It was like drinking from a fire hose of information.
Yeah,
But once I got these down, it really changed how I approach reading.
I can imagine.
So, to kick things off, let's define skimming and scanning. One of the sources compared skimming to reading a movie summary just enough to get the main idea.
Right.
And then there's scanning. It's more like using that search function in your brain to zero in on those specific details.
Yeah, it's like, when you need to find one specific fact, you don't have to read the whole thing.
Exactly. And the source really stressed that understanding the structure of a text is key for both of these skills. It's like those headings, subheadings, bullet points, they're our roadmap.
Absolutely. And people often ignore them.
I know, right? It's like they think they're just decoration or something.
Yeah, but you tell you how the information is laid out, you can navigate so much better.
Yeah, instead of wandering around lost in a jungle of words.
Exactly.
I even saw this cool example about outlining a passage before even starting to read it.
Oh, yeah, like with a topic like space exploration.
Exactly. You'd quickly jot down the key sections like historical events, technological advancements, future missions.
Kind of like creating a mental map.
Yes. And you could do that for like a dense report at work, a research paper, anything really. You'll know exactly where to go to find what you need.
Yeah, it can save you so much time.
Absolutely. So let's zoom in on skimming. What are the secrets to getting the gist without getting bogged down in every single word?
Well, like we said, examine the structure. But pay close attention to the first and last sentences of each paragraph, too.
Those topic sentences. They often have the most important info.
Right. And any highlighted words or phrases usually point to key concepts.
It's like hitting those bullet points in a presentation, just the high-impact stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
But isn't there a risk of missing crucial details if we don't read every word?
That's where practice comes in. The more you skim, the better you get at spotting those key bits of information.
So it's a skill you develop over time.
Exactly. It's like anything else, you get better with practice.
So you're saying just start with shorter articles, maybe even set a timer just to get a feel for it.
Yep, start small.
Yeah.
Even try skimming a news article or a blog post you'd normally read.
Good idea. Okay, so let's move on to scanning, that super focused search technique.
Right, where you really zero in on what you need.
What are the key steps to becoming a master scanner? Like, how do we unlock that laser focus?
Well, first you need to figure out what you're looking for. Let's say, for example, you want to know who the first person to walk on the moon was.
Okay, so we need a clear question in mind.
Yep. And then think about the keywords. In this case, it would be moon landing or first person.
Got it. So I've got those keywords locked and loaded. Now what?
This is where the visual guide comes in. Use your finger, a pen, even just your eyes, to quickly move across the text. Just focus on those keywords and any related words.
It's like using Control plus F in a document, but with our own brain power.
Exactly. The source mentioned using this to find a date in a textbook, or maybe a statistic in a report.
Oh yeah, those situations where you know the specific detail you're looking for.
Right, and with scanning, you don't have to read every word, you just target what you need.
Makes sense. So we've got skimming for the big picture, scanning for specifics, but how do they actually work together?
That's a good question.
Like, are they rivals or are they teammates?
Definitely teammates. Skimming gives you the context, the framework, the overall understanding. Then scanning comes in to help you pull out the exact details when you need them.
Like having a wide-angle lens and a zoom lens on a camera.
Yeah, perfect analogy.
You use the wide angle to capture the scene, then zoom in for the details.
Exactly. So going back to space exploration, you could skim to get a sense of the timeline and the major events.
And the key players.
Right, and then if a question asks for a specific date or the name of an astronaut, you'd scan for that.
So skimming sets the stage, then scanning swoops in for those targeted extractions.
Exactly. It's a powerful combination, especially when you're under time pressure.
Like in an exam situation or when you have a ton of reports to get through.
Yeah, it's like a secret weapon for information overload. But even with these awesome techniques, we all make mistakes.
Oh, for sure. We're human, after all.
So let's talk about some common pitfalls. The source highlighted a few that even experienced readers fall into.
Okay, lay it on us. What's the first one to watch out for?
spending too much time on one section, or getting hung up trying to understand every single word.
Oh, I've totally been there. It's like falling into a research black hole.
Yeah. But remember, skimming and scanning are about efficiency.
Right. It's not about becoming an expert on the topic in 5 minutes.
Exactly. You have to be mindful of the time. Don't be afraid to move on.
So being strategic, knowing when to move on, that's key. What else should we watch out for?
Not practicing under realistic conditions, especially if you're prepping for something like the IELTS.
Oh, right, because you need to get used to that time pressure.
Exactly. You want to be able to work quickly and accurately when the stakes are high.
Makes sense. And what about when we hit a question and just completely blank? Any advice for those head-scratching moments?
Don't ever leave an answer blank, especially on a multiple choice test. Just make an educated guess.
Oh, right, because it's better than nothing.
Exactly.
Okay, good tip. And any other advice for test takers specifically?
Be super careful when you're transferring your answers to the answer sheet.
Especially when you're under pressure, it's so easy to make a silly mistake.
Yeah, I'd be ashamed to lose points because of something like that.
Double checking can be a lifesaver.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got the basics, the common mistakes, but now I'm really curious about putting this all into practice effectively.
Yeah, how to actually make it work.
What does strategic practice look like?
Well, first, don't just practice with anything. Find materials that are like what you'll see in the real deal.
Like if I'm prepping for the IELTS, children's books are probably not going to cut it.
Right. You want passages that are similar in length and difficulty.
Okay, so we need to train our brains to handle the specific demands of the test.
Exactly. And the official IELTS practice materials are really good for that. They give you authentic passages and questions.
It's like a dress rehearsal before the big performance.
That's a great way to put it.
But what about those of us who aren't prepping for the IELTS but still want to up our skimming and scanning game in everyday life? Any advice?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way is to just start incorporating these techniques into your normal reading.
So instead of just passively reading everything, be more deliberate?
Exactly. Choose when to skim, when to scan, and when to do a deep dive.
Okay, so being more mindful about how we read. Are there any types of texts that lend themselves better to skimming and scanning?
News articles, blog posts, online reports, even emails.
Those tend to have a predictable structure, right?
Yeah, and they usually have that key information up front.
So like instead of being overwhelmed by a long email, you could skim to get the gist and then scan for specific details you need.
Exactly.
And the best part is you can use this for any topic.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, this has been super helpful, but I'm wondering, for someone who's just starting out, what's the real payoff here? Why put in the effort?
Well, besides potentially acing the IELTS, it just makes you a more efficient reader. You can absorb information faster.
So it's not just about tests, it's about being a better reader overall.
Right. Imagine being able to quickly get through a news article, a research paper, or a long email. You'll save time and be more informed.
Okay, now that's a superpower I want.
It is a pretty valuable one.
And it takes time, right?
Oh, yeah. Mastering anything takes time and practice.
Be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, find what works for you.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a destination.
Well said. On that note, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll explore even more advanced techniques and strategies to take those reading skills to the next level. So stay tuned.
Looking forward to it.
All right, we're back ready to uncover some more pro-level skimming and scanning strategies. In the first part, we talked about common mistakes, like getting stuck in those details. But how do we balance speed with actually understanding what we read?
That's a good point. You don't want to just speed through and miss everything.
Right, exactly.
It's about being more mindful, I think. Remember, it's not about reading less. It's reading smarter.
I like that. Reading smarter, not just faster.
It's like a triage system. You're quickly figuring out what needs your attention right away and what you can kind of skim over.
Ooh, I like that information first responder. So when I'm skimming, how do I know which parts deserve that closer look?
Well, those structural clues are really helpful. Headings, subheadings, changes in font, those are like signposts. They're highlighting the important stuff.
Oh, okay.
And remember the power of those first and last sentences in a paragraph.
Those topic sentences, yeah.
They often pack the most punch.
Makes sense. But I'm thinking about something. The source mentioned using this for emails and online articles, stuff like that.
Right.
How does that work? They're not as structured.
It's a good question. Even with less formal stuff, there are still patterns you can look for.
Okay.
So in an email, A lot of times the first paragraph will summarize the main point, or they might use bullet points to highlight action items or
But
something.
there's still a kind of code to crack even in everyday reading.
Exactly. And that's where practice is so important. The more you use these techniques, the better you get at recognizing those little clues.
Speaking of practice, I remember we talked about setting specific goals for each practice session. What would that look like for someone who wants to get faster at scanning?
Sure. Let's say you're using a practice IELTS passage. Maybe it's about renewable energy.
Okay.
Your goal could be to find 3 specific things: the year a certain technology was invented, the name of a leading researcher, and the percentage of energy that comes from renewables globally.
Okay, so I have those targets before I even start reading.
Right. And then you would time yourself as you scan the passage for those 3 pieces of information. And then the next time you practice, you try to beat that time while still being accurate, of course.
So it's like a timed scavenger hunt.
Exactly. You can actually make it kind of fun.
I like that. Okay, but what if I get stuck? Like, I'm looking for a keyword and I just can't find it anywhere.
Yeah, that happens. Don't panic, though. This is where those secondary keywords are really useful.
Oh, right. The keyword pyramid.
Yep. So if you're not finding your main keyword, try looking for those related terms. It might lead you to the information in a roundabout way.
Okay, so it's like a backup plan for your search.
Yeah, exactly. And keep an eye out for those visual cues, too. The information might be in a table or a graph or even a bulleted list, even if the exact word isn't there.
Got it. Like putting together the clues to solve a mystery.
I like that. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about a technique that can be super helpful when you're reading longer, more complex stuff. It's called chunking.
Chunking. I've heard that before, but I thought that was for memory.
It is, but it can help with reading, too. It's a way to break down a big chunk of information into smaller pieces.
Okay.
Instead of trying to read a whole page or a whole chapter at once, you divide it up based on natural breaks in the text.
So instead of a marathon, it's like a series of sprints.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And those chunks could be paragraphs or sections with headings or even just groups of sentences that seem to go together.
Okay. That makes it seem less overwhelming. But how do we actually do it?
So let's say you're reading a research paper about AI.
Artificial intelligence.
Right. Instead of reading the whole thing at once, you could break it down into chunks based on the headings, like the introduction, the methods, the results, the conclusion.
Okay.
And then you could skim each chunk to get the main idea before moving on to the next one.
So it's like pacing yourself.
Exactly. And here's a tip. As you skim each chunk, jot down a couple of key words or phrases that capture the main point. That way you have a little summary you can refer to later.
Oh, that's clever. Like creating our own little index.
Exactly. And by the time you've skimmed all the chunks, you'll have a good understanding of the whole thing without having to read every single word.
I'm really starting to see how all of this can be so helpful. But, learning any new skill can be tough.
Yeah, it takes time.
What advice would you give to someone who's feeling a little overwhelmed or discouraged?
First of all, don't be too hard on yourself. You're not going to become a skimming and scanning expert overnight. It takes time and practice.
It's like learning a new language. You wouldn't expect to be fluent right away.
Exactly. And there are going to be times when it's frustrating or you feel like you're not making progress. The important thing is to stick with it.
So embrace those stumbles. They're part of the process.
Absolutely. And remember, you don't have to do it all alone. There are lots of resources out there. Books, articles, online courses, even study groups.
It's like having a whole support system for our reading skills.
Exactly. So keep practicing, keep experimenting, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Awesome advice. Well, I think it's time to wrap up this part and move on to the grand finale, where we'll bring everything together and leave our listener with some final words of wisdom, ready to inspire them to become reading masters.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, we've done it. We've explored skimming and scanning, those awesome techniques for efficient reading, and we've talked about how to avoid those common pitfalls that trip people up.
And don't forget, practice makes perfect. Setting those goals and finding good practice material really make a difference.
Definitely. But before we wrap up this deep dive into the world of reading, what's the one thing you really want our listener to take away?
Well, skimming and scanning are about more than just tests or information overload. They're skills you could use in everyday life.
Right, so it's not just about being faster.
Exactly. Imagine being able to get the main points of a news article quickly, or diving into a research paper without feeling intimidated, or even just getting through those long work emails faster.
Sounds pretty amazing.
It is. It's all possible. Anyone can learn to do this.
So where do we begin? What's the first step?
Think about what you read the most every day. Do you read a lot of news articles, blog posts, research papers, those work emails, anything?
Okay, so look at what we already read and see where we can use these techniques.
Right. And once you figure that out, start experimenting. See if you can skim a news article to get the main idea before you decide if you want to read the whole thing. Or try scanning a research paper to find specific data.
So basically make those everyday tasks a chance to practice.
Exactly. And as you practice, figure out what works best for you. Some techniques might work better than others, and that's okay.
Like finding our own reading groove.
Yeah, exactly. And as you get more comfortable with all this, you'll see that reading becomes less of a chore and more enjoyable.
Who wouldn't want that?
Right. And remember, this is a journey. There'll be times when it's hard or you want to give up, but the important thing is to keep going
So embrace those challenges, right? They're part of the process.
and celebrate the progress you make. Every time you skim a tough article or scan a document to find exactly what you need, give yourself a pat on the back.
It's about recognizing that growth. Those little wins add up.
They really do. And never be afraid to ask for help or look for resources.
Right, there are tons of great resources out there.
And there are so many other people who have gone through this same process. You're not alone.
It's like having a whole community of reading experts in our corner. Well, it's time to say goodbye to this deep dive. But before we do, any final thoughts?
I guess just remember, you have the power to become a better reader. Try out these techniques, practice, and keep exploring the world of reading.
Love that. So to all of you listening, take what you've learned and start putting it into practice. You might surprise yourself with what you can accomplish. Until next time, happy reading.